You took your place.
Yeah.
We don't see, we aren't getting it. Yeah. Hi.
We can see you all. And if you're joining us on Zoom, we'd ask you to mute for now.
Yeah, mute over here. Right here.
What, mute?
Mhm.
Yeah, or I can mute you if you don't know how.
We're muted. Now, what about this, getting the whole screen? Look at view. Go up here and look at view. Look gallery view. Okay. We need
I'm going to mute you for you. There. Andersons are now muted. We have plenty. Hey, Andy and Annette, can you hear me? Okay, I muted you, so you don't have to worry about it. I think when you talk, I switch back to you, or when we talk.
I said, hello, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Here's my spring.
Fall down. I don't know what to do about that. I don't see you on here, but you are here. They went away.
Larry. That's that means that so I can see, I don't see that. It's just you all in the room need to know that we don't know why it's like that, but it is. But don't worry, when you need to see something that's not the speaker, you will. I don't know what they've done. Good evening, and good evening. It's nice to see you all this evening as we come together to learn about disaster preparedness. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, I hope you can hear everything okay. I can see Belinda's face and she's smiling with thumbs up, so I think that's a good sign. And Nancy can hear us, good. I think, can you all hear? Those of you hearing us, good. Please let me know if you have trouble. It's exciting to come together and learn about this topic of disaster preparedness. Unfortunately, I think disasters are going to be with us always. I'm sure you're going to tell us about that a little bit. It's something that scares us and makes us worried, but also important to be prepared for. So I'm excited to learn about this. If you have questions throughout, if you're on Zoom, you can just type them into your chat box. If you're in the room, you can raise your hand. And before we start, though, I'd like to offer a prayer. Gracious and loving God, pour out your spirit on each of us in this space. As we come to hear things that may scare us, but things that intrigue us. Things that remind us of your creation and our role in the care of that creation. Help us to listen with open ears, open hearts, and open minds. We come this night asking that you would be present. Amen. I would invite Belinda Strickland, who is the chair of our outreach committee, to share.
Okay, I have the honor of introducing tonight our special speaker. Michael Moore started this journey in the disaster world back in 2013 when he served as the UMCOR Recovery Director for the 2013 Colorado floods. He and his team of case managers, volunteer coordinators, and project managers played a central role.
The audio is awful.
From that disaster. Since then, he has served as the Mountain Sky Conference Disaster Response and Preparedness Director, working across a 4-state area to help individuals, churches, and communities prepare for and respond to disaster. Recently, he has assumed the role as the UMCOR Recovery Director, working with the Long-Term Recovery Group and Recovery Navigation Program for the Marshall Fire. So please welcome Michael.
Linda.
You might want to turn your screen just a little closer towards you.
More like that. Everybody
Yours
can
is
hear
the one-
okay?
Wait, yours is the one.
Yeah. Thanks to you folks on Zoom. I know this is a little clumsy, but we'll do our best to make sure that we communicate some information to you that works out. Thanks everybody for coming on this beautiful fall evening. Start off with just a question. How many people here are a survivor of a disaster? And for you in the Zoom world, we probably had 7 or 8 folks here. Say anybody earthquake? Earthquakes? Ooh, we have some earthquake folks. Wildfires. Of course, a couple here. Floods. Ooh. Tornadoes. Hurricanes. Ooh. I think we have, for those of you on Zoom, Pua is the winner. We've been handing up 4 or 5 times there. I think the thing that it's interesting because the pace and the number of disasters continues to increase. It's, you know, we think back 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago, and it was a very rare thing. Here in the Mountain Sky Conference, you know, if you go before the floods, you know, there wasn't really a whole lot of major disasters here in Colorado. And in the last 10 years, we've had, you know, 2 major disasters, probably a, you know, number of wildfires just in the last 10 years. And I think with climate change and increasing population growth, this is only going to continue. So that's why I think we're here tonight to talk about how to get ready for those disasters. Because the question's not when, it's if. Or is it if, not when? Yeah. So I've got a presentation I'll go through, and I will share my screen. There you go. So the question is, are you ready for the next disaster? And no one's really ready. You know, it's an unexpected event, so you're not really ready. So it's really, I don't know, I couldn't work out the wording to be readier. It just doesn't roll off the tongue, but really, can you be readier for a disaster? And what I did to kind of put this together is I looked at a number of different sources of information, things I've been involved with, presentations I've been to. UMCOR has a great program called Connected Neighbors, which talks about how you as an individual, how us as a church, and how the community can respond to disasters. I grabbed some stuff from that. The federal government, FEMA's got some very good stuff. City of Boulder has some really good stuff. And so I tried to grab all that together, and along with some of maybe my personal biases and preferences in kind of crafting this thing together. I tried to condense some of it as well, because there are books and volumes, and we could spend hours and hours talking about disaster preparedness. So I tried to condense it and hopefully personalize it a bit to Colorado, because there's a lot of stuff out there about, you know, hurricanes, which I don't think we're really going to see a whole lot here, but wildfires, flood, and things like that, we will. So I kind of tried to keep that stuff to the side. And the other thing to remember is that all disasters are different. As much as we talk about preparing for certain things, it's going to be something that you won't expect. So that's the disaster world. So there's a lot of stuff that I'll be kind of talking about. There's not an expectation that anybody will even come close to doing part of this stuff. But hopefully you'll take something home, and something will resonate with you as you think about what you need to do for you and your families as it relates to disaster. There's 3 or 4 sections. And what I'll do is I'll stop after each section and see if there's any questions. And I think those folks that are on Zoom can put it in the chat. We'll get the questions that way. Stephanie is monitoring the chat. And so we'll just go forward. Last point is, and I put this together, and if you make a disaster presentation, you got to have pictures of disasters and things like that in it. But for some people, it could be a little triggering. And so I kind of apologize if I've kind of brought back a bad memory or two by throwing those up there, but it's one of those kind of things that if you do this, you end up doing it. Anyway, so let's see here. Next slide, please. So what are we going to talk about tonight? First, just a kind of a quick disaster overview. Sort of disaster 101, a couple of slides to talk about disaster. And then there's 4 areas that I'm going to focus on in terms of disaster preparedness. The first is protect your home and property. The second is plan, be ready for a disaster. Third is to prepare an emergency kit. And fourth, and I apologize, I couldn't come up with a good P. I just worked really hard, and so proactive. It's about emergency notification. So I apologize for it not kind of rolling off the tongue, but we'll do it. So what you'll take away from this, you're not going to take away any paper. You know, if we'd have done this 10 years ago, I'd have given you a nice fat thick book. Everyone would have taken that home and put it on the shelf. But we're not going to do that. This is part of our green presentation from our green team, and this is a focus on climate change for this month. So we're not going to print any paper, but you know where to go. And there's on the screen the website mountainview.org/disaster resources. And on that page, if you go to that, there are web links for almost everything that I'm going to talk about. And I'll stop and say that's on the website. So there's probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 different links on that page. So anything that you need, just go to this website, go to this page, and then you'll see it there. And it's kind of broken out and say, you know, like disaster ready kit. You click here and it'll take you to a certain website for a number of different sources. Like I said, I pulled this from everywhere. So that's the web repository. Everything that we talk about today is in one spot. So else you'll take away is the 4 Ps, okay, 3.5 maybe. And hopefully increase your awareness of what you could do for disaster readiness. So away we go, disaster 101. And I'll read this, because I think it's important. It kind of sets the stage that disaster is a sudden, calamitous event that seriously disrupts the functioning of a community, causes human, material, and economic or environmental losses that exceed the community's ability to cope. And it's exceeding the community's ability to cope is kind of the key here. Because if you think of a disaster, somebody said, oh, only 10 homes were destroyed. Well, if it's a small town and there's 20 homes, guess what? That exceeds that community's ability to cope with that disaster. So for those folks, that's a real disaster. You think about on the other end of the spectrum, Florida, you think they've got enough people to deal with what went on down there? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And they're ready for it, right? Preparedness, these kind of presentations, every day somebody's talking about this. And you still can't be ready for something like that. So disaster exceeds the community's ability to cope. And some people extend this definition to things like a school shooting or an event like that, where you don't think of it a natural disaster, but more of a human caused disaster, which could do that. And so that kind of expands the role of disaster. So kind of think of it in that context. And the second thing I want to talk about are the phases of a disaster. And this is pretty standard for any disaster type presentation. I'll talk about the 5 disaster phases. We'll talk about rescue. Think of a disaster. This is where you want to get people someplace where they're safe. This is where people are in harm's way. You want to get them out of harm's way. And this is first responders, and nobody like us. We all just stay inside and let them do their job. And that takes who knows how long. Could be hours, could be days, but it takes a while to rescue the people from it. Secondly is relief. And that's where you've got people that are safe now, but you want to get them to a place where they're safe, sanitary, and secure. That's sort of disaster words we use around that phase. And it could be a shelter, it could be back home, but it's making sure that people are someplace where they can stay for a little while as they begin the recovery process. Then the recovery comes right after that. And that takes a while. If you go back to me, an easy example was the floods. You know, the rescue phase took 2 or 3 days. The relief phase took 3 months. The recovery phase took more than 3 years. And so it's a long-term process. We start talking about recovery, and you think of the Marshall Fire now. You know, Arthur showed, his son's got 1 wall up. That's outstanding, right? I mean, compared to everyone else, he's way ahead of the game, because there are people who aren't going to be done with that not till 2022. And it's a process that takes a long time, and it's slow, and it's not fun, but people have to go through that. And then you review what happened, what worked, what didn't. And then where we are today, readiness. Thinking about what you can do to plan and prepare. So that's kind of disaster 101, just kind of a hopefully orient yourselves to what we're going to talk about here for a few minutes. So again, the 4 areas of focus: home and property, getting ready for the disaster, emergency kit, and emergency notification. I'll go through each of those 4 things. Then afterwards, I'll stop and see if we have questions after those. So maybe I should stop right here. Does anybody have any questions at this point in time before I trundle ahead? I guess not, which is okay. And we'll start off with protecting your home and your property.
Someone just joined.
Some just joined in, great. Just from a financial perspective, to think about what might happen. And one of the recommendations a lot of folks have is to start an emergency savings account. You know, everyone has savings for different things. You know, they talk about a rainy day fund. Well, I'm saving this money for a rainy day. And guess what? Sometimes it is a rainy day. You have to kind of spend that, because a disaster causes a lot of financial hardship. And thinking about that in advance and having a little bit of money set aside just in case is not a bad thing. So from a financial perspective, saving a little money. But secondly, protect your important records and document your possessions. So we'll talk about the document possessions a little bit later, but talk about protecting your important records. Make sure that you've got things like mortgage, will, bank statements, passports, all of birth certificates. And I'm sure you can think of a few other things like that. Make sure you know where those are. Try to have them stored someplace. You know, a lot of people have like a fireproof safe that they put those into. That's not a bad idea. Storing them off-site at a bank, not a bad idea. But knowing where those are, locating them, and putting them together is important. And below here on the screen, there are 2 resource links, which are links in that document that we created on the Mountain View website. There's a couple of FEMA documents that go through these things in a little more detail than I just did. Be prepared for a financial emergency talks about, talking about savings and what you need to do. And then secondly, safeguarding critical documents and valuables. Another FEMA document talks about what different ideas of what you can do to safeguard those kinds of things. So disaster preparedness really starts with financially understanding what you've got and what you need and what you need to either save or store. Second is insurance. And anybody who's been involved in Marshall fires has seen that. Like, insurance is a huge issue. This is, I can't tell you how important it is to review your insurance policies regularly. The timing of this fire couldn't have been worse. Because the 12 months preceding that, think of the bubble that our real estate went through in those 12 months, and think about the costs of materials and rebuilding in those 12 months before that. And this is why so many people got stuck short, because everything went up so dramatically that their insurance policies that they might have only looked at a year before were woefully short. So if there's one thing you take away is that please go back, talk to your insurance. Anybody here an insurance agent? Okay. Well, they will sit down with you and go through your policy. It's a good thing to do. Even if you're a renter, same kind of thing. Everything changes and costs go up. So make sure you've got the right kind of coverage. I mean, things like if you said ALE 6 months ago around here, people wouldn't know what you're talking about. Everybody knows that's additional living expense. That's what a lot of people are living on right now because their insurance companies pay for it. Some didn't. You got a problem. Some were only 6 months, some were 12 months. We need at least 2 years. So it's important to go and look through that. So one thing if you take away from this is please go back, look at your insurance policies and make sure you've got the coverage. Underinsured is a big deal. Resources, there's, again, if you go back to, the website and that page, I put something in there from a group called United Policyholders. This is a group that's been around for, 10 years, 15 years now. And it's a advocacy group for insurance policyholders. They don't work for insurance companies, they're on your side. And most of the people that I've met that work in this organization have suffered a major loss in a disaster. And so a lot of them volunteer their time to help out with this. And they've done a lot of stuff. They've got some great information and some great things. So I would go to that United Policyholders. Their website in general has got a ton of good stuff on insurance, but this is a specific document they have that covers tips for insuring your home. So.
One thing that's worth knowing that some insurance companies provide what's known as a guaranteed rebuild insurance, which it doesn't expose you to the sudden increase that might happen because they're going to pay the rebuild at the current costs. You don't have to keep checking it, to see if it's kept up with the inflation or household costs.
What's that called?
Well, guaranteed rebuild insurance.
Yeah, the
Not
question.
all companies have it, but some do. It's very worthwhile having.
Well, to add to Arthur's comment, we had a lot of people, especially neighbors I've talked to, who ran into that very issue because they had replacement coverage, which we all thought covered our house to rebuild it. But it is what Arthur is saying, you have to have the guarantee.
Yeah, you have it to a dollar amount versus a guaranteed amount. And you're right. I think what we've seen is, there's as many insurance companies as there are people in this room, and they all have a slightly different take on it. And some have the guaranteed replacement, others insurance companies don't. We're working with the fire survivors today. We have some insurance consultants that are working with homeowners, going through the 50 or 60 page legal document, looking for little things that they could possibly find. So it's a complex world. There's a lot of different options out there, but excellent points. Thank you for so also the financial is a home inventory, because again, your insurance policy should cover contents, but what do you have? What kind of refrigerator do you have? What kind of television do you have? What model? Is it replacement cost? Or is it going to be, what's the other way? Well, anyway, there's a different ways to go about it, but again, the suggestion is to do a complete home inventory. And it could be as simple as with your phone, walking around and narrating what's in your house. There are other tools that allow you to maybe capture the serial number and model number of whatever it is. You can maybe scan in receipts. There are people that once it all goes away, trying to remember what you had is very hard. So there are some tools, and I looked through some of the tools. I don't think any of them out there are that easy to work with right now. I'd seen a couple before that have kind of changed, but there are a number of smartphone apps that basically walk you through the process. You take that time. Insurance companies, some of the insurance companies have tools that get their policyholders. United policyholders are old friends. They have a spreadsheet that they will provide that you can put information in. But again, capturing what you have in your household is important in terms of protecting your home and property. I've got some stuff here on wildfire mitigation. I might go through this a little fast, but the idea here is, again, protecting your home and property. And here in Colorado, it's wildfires. What can you do? And there's a few things that you can do. The terms that are used are structural ignitability, which is, this sounds awful, and defensible space. And more or less, it's stuff around your house. Hopefully it doesn't burn. And outside of your house, you make some defensible space so it doesn't as easily get to your house and burn. And probably more for people that live out more in the mountains or more wooded areas, but still for people in neighborhoods, as we found out, this is important. The way they like to talk of things is the ignition zones. They have 3 different zones, from 0 to 5 feet from your house, 5 to 30 feet, and then out to 100 feet, different things that you need to do to make sure that your home is protected. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail. It's a little bit, put a little bit too much in here. Well, sorry for that, but basically, zone 1, try to prevent the flames from coming too close to the house. Zone 2 is give it less fuel, and zone 3 is interrupt any fires that head towards your house. So, yeah, there's some great resources on the website for this. Our friends up in Fort Collins at CSU have, there's 3 great documents. One, protect your home and property from wildfire. The second, about the home ignition zone. And third, which is very interesting, wildfire resistant plants. You can plant stuff around your home that doesn't, it does a better job. It's like less oily, produces not as many like dry leaves and things like that. So you can put things in your garden that doesn't burn as well as some other things. And the same thing with trees. There are some trees that are a little more susceptible to this. So as you think about your home and wildfire mitigation, you can go to there.
Someone asked the question, is siding significantly less structurally ignitable than wood?
I do not know an answer to that. Does anybody? I mean, it seems like it would be harder to burn. Yeah.
All I can tell you is, they did a survey in the Marshall Fire and everything burned. It didn't matter what their house was made of.
Right. Once you get a huge fire like that, but you know, it might make a difference in another situation when it's not such a massive thing. So we'll move on to number 2. So that was protecting your home and your property. And we'll go to number 2, which is, plan, getting ready for disaster. So is anybody here in 4th grade? Any 4th graders? No? Anybody have a 4th grader at home? Well, if you remember when you were in 4th grade, remember the fire guy came to your classroom? What was the assignment he had you do? Had you go home and draw a map of your house, and where were the routes that you went out, and where would you meet? Still not a bad idea. Still not a bad idea to understand how you're going to get out of your house, and if you do that, where you're going to be. And so, again, you don't have to have a 4th grader to do this. You can do it yourself, but it's something to think about. How do you get out of your house? And if you do, where are you going to meet your family members or friends? It's the same thing, in a school, business, or a public building. You're in the church. Where are the exits? Hopefully I can see the sign over there. So the exits are marked. Have an idea of escape routes and how you're going to get out of different buildings. And 3, in the community, and this is something that we talk about individual preparedness, but wherever you live, there may be people, neighbors, who, for whatever reason, might need a little help. You want to make sure that you check on them and make sure that they're safe if they need to get evacuated. So think about how to get to safety if you have to be evacuated. Secondly, if you have to be evacuated, where are you going to go? It kind of depends on the location, where the disaster is, and where you're at. But again, planning beforehand, where are you going to go if there is a disaster? There's transportation. Do you need some way out? Does somebody have to come and get you? Do you have a car? Do you have a bike? Is there a way to walk? How do you get out of your neighborhood? Personal experience during the Marshall Fire, we were evacuated, and the fire, there's only 2 routes out of our neighborhood. The other 2 were blocked off, and people were confused, going the wrong direction. We had a neighbor that drove right through the fire. It was like, no, and the other routes, it took hours to go, 20 feet. And so think about how to get out of there and where you're going to go. So how is your neighborhood? I know up in the mountains, they always say there's got to be 2 ways in and out. There's got to be a way in and a way out. 2 ways to get out if there's a disaster. Well, even in the neighborhood, there may not be that many escape routes. So give some thought to how you get out of your neighborhood or your area and where you're going to stay. There's shelters are usually put up with that kind of a disaster. Maybe hotel, friends, and relatives. Again, there's another resource that can give you some more information on sheltering and what you need to do. It's on the website on that page. And the resource is called FEMA Shelter. It's an interesting document that talks about that. And the third is communications, because you may not be together with your family when disaster strikes. Because it happens during the middle of the day. Somebody could be at school, somebody could be at church, somebody could be at work, somebody may be someplace else. So how are you going to get together if something like that happens? Is it your cell phone could be the way to do it? Could be. Is there going to be a meeting place? And sometimes they ask us to have a communications point outside of the community, because sometimes it's difficult to talk. Sometimes cell phones and things get jammed up here, but you may be able to reach outside. So if you have your brother in Chicago or whatever, be that link, you can talk to them, and they can be the link to other family members. And also creating a list of emergency contact information. Again, there's a great FEMA form that you can go through, and it kind of prompts you to ask some questions about different people and different ways to communicate. And what's the phone number for the church? What's the phone number for school? What's the phone number for these different things? You can put together a plan that helps you communicate with your loved ones should a disaster strike. Do we have a question?
Are we recording this?
Yes.
This is a lot of great information.
Good timing, because that is the end of this little second chapter about plans. So you're planning, we'll go back to a couple of slides, planning how you get to safety if you're evacuated, where you're going to go, and then how are you going to get in touch with each other. So those are the 3 things with this planning for the disaster side.
And we talk about planning like yourself. One of the things that came up with Marshall was like, you had to evacuate. So is that part of the plan, or is that a different part, or is that just specific to that type of disaster?
Very good. Yes. So what do you need to take if you've been evacuated? How many,
We packed up, even though we weren't in the direct path and everything. And I was going around getting important things, and you know what he took? His sermon file.
yeah. Well,
If you need a safe place to
either,
store,
yeah, so it's either that's papers, important documents, or irreplaceable memorabilia. But, yeah, that's a great question, because some of it is, how much time do you have? If you've got 5 minutes, right? If you have maybe an hour, you have a little more time, depending on the disaster, you might not have that much time.
I would add, you mentioned the safe deposit box you can have in your house, a heavy duty one. They do not survive a real heavy fire. My son had one and he got it out and he managed to break it open. It was just charred inside.
oh,
I've heard that, yeah.
And in the hurricane, my son's washed away. So
Yeah.
those are two situations, so I don't know, maybe you have some other ideas, because the banks, they could have, I don't know if they would have survived it or not, it was a very, very hot fire.
Yeah, well, I think it's, making either making or keeping a copy in a different location. In fact, that's one of the things that they say here to take with you is important documents. So you might have them in, one file that you can grab quickly. Because, to be honest, that's what I did when we were evacuated. I had one file that had all the papers I needed, all the right numbers, everything. That and my laptop were the first things that I grabbed. So,
One of the things my brother Nelson's house in part is doing now is taking photos of those documents as they store in the cloud. And the cloud is.
Yep.
Is always they're charging a lot of money to the same place. So.
great point, great point. So, this is,
And Mike, I don't know if you have this coming up or not, but I think it would be helpful, because my son found, because they lost their everything in the hurricane, as a lot of people in this room know, Katrina. But anyway, I think it would be important to have a list of the documents that are extremely difficult to retrieve, shall we say, if you don't have them anymore. Because there are some that are much more difficult than other ones. And I'm not sure I remember all that, but I think it would be good to have that kind of a list.
that's a great point. I don't know that any of the links I have that list. But that's a great point, because there are some things you're right that you gotta write your congressman to get, instead of
Right.
one call to the bank, you got your, those kinds of things. That's a great point. And a good point. So anyway, this is actually from the city of Boulder. I told you they had some good stuff. This is part of it. They have 7 Ps. I'm impressed.
Man,
I'm impressed.
I'm sure it was a team effort.
Yeah, sure, yeah, a large team. But it's really important to think about these are the kinds of things, because excuse me, some people think prescriptions. Do you remember to grab your prescriptions before you go, including your eyeglasses? That's important, because if you're gone for 3 days, 5 days without that, some people, that's a big issue. So important documents, papers, personal computers, and then credit cards, debit cards, cash, because you never know what you're gonna need. So there's a lot of talk around the whole Go Kit thing. Go ahead.
Is there any site that addresses like the people in the Marshall Fire that went home? What you should do to prepare for a disaster in which you are not there for the 5 minutes to get anything together? Are you ready? Like people, they had their pets in their house, they had their papers and everything, but they couldn't get to them. Have you read any?
What to do to avoid something like that?
Or how do you prepare for when you have a disaster occur and you're not present? People were off
On vacation, right, yeah, they came back and said nothing, yeah. Yeah, I really don't know how to answer that, because it's difficult. Because if we're talking about preparing for a disaster, it says you never know what's gonna happen, you never know what kind of disaster it is, how much warning you're gonna have. So some of these things I'm kind of going through tonight are stuff you can do. Does that mean that you're clean? No. No, but there was a good point about, I think it was Arthur, taking pictures of some of your documents, so it's up on the web someplace. That was one of the documents that was used to do the home inventory, was also stored on the web. Some of the things you can't do, but those things you can. If you have some of those things stored maybe off-site, there's different ways to go around it, but that's, it's a difficult process to go through.
Just one thing, to have it all in a box, so if you were somewhere and say to your neighbor, there is a bright orange box in my closet, you can grab it. And then having neighbors with pets that you help take care of, and you gotta keep the house, you can go get,
And maybe step back even one level above what Mary Beth was saying. Know your neighbors, right?
Yes.
Not just know them, but know them well enough that you would not hesitate to send them into your house if need be.
They have their key, you have their key.
Yeah, we know where the key is.
Or even if you have a spare key hidden somewhere on top,
Right.
you can say, go to the stone, there's a key.
Yeah. Great. Well, those are excellent suggestions. Excellent.
One thing I wonder about is if you have any resources of like how to manage your ability to do this, because I know lots of folks that had prepared at different levels, but they were so traumatized and anxious, and the ambiguity of not knowing or knowing, they couldn't, cope with getting through 7 feet. So are there any resources like to bring yourself back to where the brain is working again, and you're not just sort of fight or flight?
I would think that some of this, if you're thinking about it now versus then, that's, to me, it is if, for instance, using this as an example, you got 10 minutes, like, what do I do? Oh, I know, here's the 7 things I need to think about. Some of it is, I
You
think,
don't really know how you're gonna be.
you don't know how you, right, you don't know how you be, but there's some things you can do, some things you can't do, right, as a person.
There's also a strategy, you can say, pull a person into their body, name their senses, name 5 things you see, 4 things you do. So that you get them into their body, out of the spin, and that helps you sleep at night.
Yeah. I mean, I think that needs to be part of preparing or planning, is having a tool to bring you back to the space where you have to act and you can't. Because I know a guy that walked right by his emergency kit, like he had a kit, he had a go kit, and he just head to the car, and then you just hear all the stories, like people know the taxi cars, they all 4 hit one. I mean, because, right, because they're like this, they're fight or flight, they're trying to survive. And so I think that's something pretty
Oh, good suggestion.
But then you have to have a partner, like you have to plan together in your community, your family unit or your neighbors to help you somehow. That's peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah, because because that's the whole thing about the go kit. I mean, I've read all these things where it's like you need 5 gallons of water per person per day. And well, no one's gonna have 100 gallons of water. That's kind of ridiculous, right? And so there's all these different theories. And again, some of that's for like hurricane areas where you're on your own for a little while, so I kind of set those kinds of things to the side. And it's more about the things that we need to deal with here. And so sometimes they say, take some of these things. And yes, I added a change of clothes because personal experience when we evacuated, I took clothes. Some other family members did. So won't name any. But yeah, it's important. It's one of the things you don't think about, but it's like, okay, I got all this stuff, and then you leave. It's like, I can't go back for X days, and I need to wear.
Then, is a solar charger for your phone. Because it's, because people
Yeah.
That's your connection to life and your family and all health.
Yeah, and a number of the things that you'll read about, Go kits, they'll say, solar radios and solar powered flashlights and things like that, which do make a difference. And there's again, great resource, the FEMA kit kind of talks about putting together the big bin like this full of all the stuff that you can do. So you can go to that and take a look at that and see what they say there. Is there questions? Okay. So that's 3, preparing the emergency kits.
I would add a couple that my granddaughter put on that list because she just had to survive that hurricane in Florida. Flashlight plus extra batteries.
Yep.
And then the non-perishable food, if you've got things in cans, gotta make sure you've got a can opener that's manual. You gotta have a way to open the food. So anyway, that's coming from my granddaughter.
Somebody who had a can of food.
Yes, went through the hurricane.
Got food, we can't get to it. Emergency notifications. How do you know what's happening? I don't know, depends on where you live. You have sirens. I think here you can hear the sirens, can't you? TV, radio, does anybody really spend that much time on TV, radio, right now? Word of mouth, maybe one of your neighbors, maybe something on your cell phone.
None of those worked in the Marshall Fire, just point of record, there was 0 notification.
Yep.
I looked out the window, there's the fire at my back door, basically.
No, what we had was same thing, no notification, but there was a notice that went out. And Libby, my daughter's friend in San Diego, texted her and said, "Hey, are you guys evacuating?" She said, "Why?" And she took a screenshot and texted her the evacuation notice. I thought, I guess this is real. And so we started searching around, and then sure enough, that happened. It's like, so kind of why does that happen? And we'll talk about that a little bit, because I did a little bit of research. I'm sure.
The different counties have had a process for their residents to sign up for the emergency, notification. I didn't do it the first time, but I got, contacted through, email and then a postcard. So I think that we're signed up.
Yes. And that's what I want to talk about here is that after the fires in the city of Boulder, they set up the emergency alert system that will send messages to cell phones. Before it didn't exist, now it does. And there's also a system, and then there's a link on the page to this website called Everbridge. It's an opt-in thing, and they will send you any emergency notifications via that. You opt in, you tell them what your address is, and they will send you text messages on your phone if there's any disasters in your area. And it's as much as, and some of them are, there's police are telling you to stay shelter in place on this block. They'll get down to those types of things, not just major disasters. But you have to, and that's what I found out in Superior, we were supposed to opt into the system. I didn't know, I lived there 20 years. I didn't know I would opt into the system. So pay a little bit of attention, use the Everbridge, the link is on that, on the page. Click on that, I did it, it's pretty simple, it takes you, maybe tops, and then you're in, and you'll get those notifications.
So I'm just curious, after all this happened, and there was never like a siren or whatever.
No, and it's right on the fire station, right by my house, it never ever went off.
So have anyone looked into that or why?
Oh, yeah. Same thing, I lived half a block from a fire station, not a siren, nothing.
Our police going through you and there with the megaphones telling you to get up, there was nothing.
Yeah, they did that, but that was 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah, it was like after everybody evacuated.
So, yeah, and I think that's been highlighted as one of the major issues we saw from this disaster, which was the notification system. So that's kind of one of the reasons I want to talk about it here is I think there's a heightened sense of awareness. Boulder has put in place this emergency cell phone thing, and they also ask everybody to opt into this Everbridge system, so you'll get get alerts on your cell phone too. Now I don't know what they've done about emergency sirens and things like that, because yeah, that was a big issue, you know. Every other, Saturday morning at 10 a.m., you hear the sirens, but during that, no. So
Is Everbridge the same thing you get if you go into the Boulder, office of emergency management? Sorry.
Probably,
Is that
yes.
Everbridge?
yeah, if you go onto their site, I think this was in a number of different locations, and that's where I kind of pulled it from. I think it was the Boulder Office of Emergency Management, as well as the city of Boulder and Boulder County all said do this. So I want to make sure that I brought this up and said do this. So there's warnings that should come out. There's 3 kinds of advisory, which is, hey, something might be happening. Warning, which is different. It could be, because I know that I grew up in sort of a tornado area, and you're tornado warning, you knew the difference. Well, here warning isn't like a tornado is coming. This is get ready to take action. Something is happening. And then the order is take action immediately. So advisory, things might happen, warning, it looks like something's going to happen. And the order is you need to take action immediately. And the types of orders that will be sent out will be climb to higher ground, which kind of what that is, evacuation, like we had here, we'll get out, shelter in place. They'll do that a lot of times for if I went to the Everbridge thing, I've seen a few of those where it's police are asking people in the 1600 block of Mohawk Drive to shelter in place because of police activity. They'll get those kinds of things. And then the all clear, which means everything's fine after one. So those are the actions that you'll get if you go through the emergency process. Wow. Grapple. Okay. Are you ready for disaster? Yeah. Are you ready for disaster? Maybe a little bit. So think of the 4 areas I talked about: home and property, insurance, your material goods in your house, savings accounts, taking care of your important documents. Have a plan. How are you going to evacuate? Where are you going to go? Where are you going to stay? How are you going to get there? Have an emergency kit. What things are you going to grab should you have to leave? And notification to make sure that you actually find out that something's happening and get involved with those. So think a little about what you need to do. The website, just go to the Mountain View website. It's disaster-resources. That's the page. On that page, I probably should pull it up so you can see it. Let's see. I get into resources. Ministries. Yeah, I'll just do that. Do the sentence. Down. Yeah, so here's what it looks like. And there's a couple of overall sites that I think are really good. They cover all kinds of stuff. FEMA, ready.gov is excellent. And then more locally, the Boulder, Colorado Emergency Preparedness Guide is about a 50-page document. There's tons of stuff in it. And then the other things that we talked about, the FEMA, be prepared for natural emergency, critical documents and valuables, wildfire resistant plants, communication forms, shelter, making kit, alerts. So go to the website, all of those links are there, so you can click on those and dive down into this kind of stuff.
Nancy wants to know if you'll put your slides for this talk on the site.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we can do that.
And the recording will also be at that site too, so.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll put the recording and the slides on there, so anybody wants to hear or listen, they can do that.
And if you can't find these things and you know how to get hold of Michael at this church, email him and he'll send you the link again.
There you go. So hopefully you're readier for the next disaster. So any other questions, comments?
One other thing you might not think of, not a good idea to have your car run down almost at the end.
Yeah.
General principle, don't let it run down too far.
Nancy says, thank you.
This afternoon or evening before we came, we got in touch with a couple. She's the daughter of one of our United Methodist pastors. Her parents are gone, but she and her family lived in Fort Myers. And her husband was a newspaper journalist, and that old newspaper closed, and so he's been doing house painting. Well, there's no houses left in Fort Myers, at least the beach area. But anyway, she was here in this area, and so he told her not to come home, that mud was up as far as their cabinets in their kitchen, and that the deck had come up and was in the middle of the kitchen floor. Which means, so we were saying, what do you need? And how can we help? And she doesn't know, but I know that they're gonna have bills come due the first of the month. And Charlie has an appointment tomorrow with FEMA about emergency loans. They have good homeowners insurance, but it takes a little while for that to come through. So this thing about get to know your neighbors, I want to ask them, do you have anybody? But she's been a nanny, so Charlie's staying at the nanny's house because they were not affected. But there's just so much that you have to deal with that you never anticipate. And so anyway, this was a clergy person that was military and then went into the ministry. And so, their family, and we're trying to see what they need.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to, I think, Trudy's point about the emotional toll that it takes, because, they're facing
Sure, Charlie says no,
months, years,
nothing.
trying to figure things out, and it's never gonna be the same. And I think that the term in disaster world they use is sort of a new normal. You can't tell people it's gonna be like it was before. It's okay, it's not, and it's hard, because that's personally, the thing that I learned more during the disaster world, working in that, was that I'd underestimated the emotional impact that this has, not just on their people who, you figure, okay, this was horrible for them, but then you go to the other family who now is involved with all of that, and in the community, and everybody has some type of impact from this, and it's hard, and it's really hard, and when it's happening, it's hard, and afterwards it's hard, and so it's something always to kind of keep in front of your mind, is that emotional aspect to what happens during disaster.
It's in the long-termness of it. I know when I was working with flood recovery in Boulder County for Encore, that was really cool. I got to hand out money. But anyway, people would say, oh, it's all done. Well, no, it was
Yeah.
it's not how it took a long time for it to be all done.
Yeah, and
Still
for a lot of people, right, for a lot of people, it was the house that they thought they'd live the rest of their lives in, it was all of their possessions, it was, and they were getting,
Regular insurance does not cover flooding. You have to have the special government insurance.
You're absolutely right, we learned that during the flood, nobody had insurance for that, and those that did, it's difficult.
If there's one thing that my brother found helpful was the city county, or whatever, had that central site where he could go and here's where to recover documents, here's how to deal with insurance, here's how to get food. And he felt like, so then you would know, even if you couldn't do it all in a day, you could go there. Today I'm going to talk to this person, but I'm coming back tomorrow to talk to that person. What a beautiful model that was. Because he said you could just walk in and know that there is help. And even to just know oh, important documents, oh, they'll help me with that. So there were
Yes.
some good lessons and there were some good things that, besides the notification, follow-up.
Yeah. Now, that's something that's kind of standard in disaster, where it was a disaster assistance center. And there are a lot of people that are during the, you go back to the phases, the rescues and the relief phases, that's where they really step up. And they're heavily involved in, like, I think groups like Red Cross, Salvation Army, and a number of faith-based organizations are really active in that phase. And so when that happens, they know what to do, they mobilize very quickly. Where we as the Methodists kind of specializes more in the longer term. So we have the ERT teams that help in the relief phase, but we're not the first guys on scene, but usually we're the last guys. So. Other questions? Comments, things that I'm certain I missed, because this is a very, very complex work.
Will you teach us more about connectedness to neighbors someday? Maybe not tonight, but it sounds
Yeah.
like that's another step that
Yeah.
a faith community can take.
Yeah, that program, yeah, there's a part where it's about focused on the individuals, and there's a slide in there that's got a picture of the flight attendant with the oxygen mask. The thing that they say is, put your mask on first. So, I mean, that's how it kind of starts talking about disaster, is take care of yourself and your family first. The second module is the church, is some of the things we talked about here. Where are our important documents stored? Are our Christmas things in the basement? Yeah, they were, weren't they? So it's yeah, it's those kinds of things. Is what would we do? What about all of the people? Do we have a talk about calling your neighbors? Do we have a way to get in contact with everybody in the church so that we can make sure this happens? And so you start talking about those things the church can do, and then the third module is okay. We put on our own masks. The church is fine. What can we do outside of our doors?
And I think what you talked about, or get to know your neighbors in the an example, but make sure you are also making sure your neighbors have someone that they know. Because in the flood, when it hit, I went in to muck out an area right afterwards with a bunch of like Samaritan's Purse and all those people that were coming in. Well, there were also, and there always are, the people that come in that do not belong to any of those groups and are ready to take advantage of people. And so if you know people around you that are old right now, sorry, or people that are young and have young children, make sure you have gotten to know them. Because I went into one 95-year-old woman, so I knocked on her house. She ended up being 95. She had a bi-level house. Up above, she came with a cane and she was stuck on the upper level. And I said, do you need help? And she said, no, some men came this morning and they said they would take out everything in my basement. I wanted them to get all my pictures and things cleared out down there. But then they said, yeah, just pay us this much money, which was $5,000. And we'll be back. We just have to go to lunch. She gave them the money. And of course, there was no one by the time I came there. So but that's why it needs to be us as church or whatever, get to know people so that they will be calling you, not just that you have someone to call. It's important.
Well, it's good to know the church has a safe deposit box and the ball will chase back.
Mike, can you tell us a little, I've been a little distracted lately. I might not have heard other announcements previous, but I didn't really know Encore was involved in the partial flood. So just give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, back after the fire, I'm the Encore rep to the Colorado BOAD. BOAD is volunteer organizations active in disaster. And so after the fire, those guys kind of mobilize, and it's the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, sort of the usual suspects, if you will. And so everybody kind of got together, and we know what we do is not really, you know, in that very early stage. But we did have 4 different ERT teams come, because we trained people on how to do ash out, which is to go sift through the ashes, unfortunately. And what's interesting about UMCOR is they're focused, and if you kind of look at the number side, there's really more on hurricanes and tornadoes. They have a lot of good training on tarping roofs and things like that, but you know, helping with wildfires. So in the West, the Western jurisdiction, we got together with a lot of their friends, particularly people in California who have lots of experience with this. And so we began to train some of our EOTs. So for the first time, they came in February and helped out with that. But then after that, the conference and the disaster team went to UMCOR and said, what can we do? What can you do? What should we do? Those questions. And we put together a grant request for them. And that was back in like April, I think. And the way they do it is twice a year. They kind of approve them. So in May, they approved our grant request. And so we were able to hire what we used to call case managers, but that's 2 social services for Boulder County. So the recovery navigators. And so that's what we're working on. It's helping. There was a contract that Boulder County Community Foundation let out for recovery navigators, and Lutheran Family Services took that contract. And so they've got the majority of the recovery navigators. We just have a small group of 3 people. And we're working together with them, helping survivors. And so it's going. It's just a small group of people, and there's a lot of people in the help. And so we're fighting through the weeds right now. We're getting there.
One of the things that was really neat about the flood recovery work is UMCOR was able to help people that didn't have any other help.
Yep.
And that was really good.
That's usually what our focus is. What the people I would be telling is we're trying to find the underserved. During the flood, we spent a lot of time in Weld County. Everybody was other places, not we were in Weld County because that's what people do.
And undocumented people to get help, because we didn't, that wasn't a question.
We had the only case managers, and so that's what we try to do. And you think about this fire, there are some underserved folks that were impacted. Yeah. In fact, going back to the neighbors, we'll end maybe with a happy story. We had a great case manager who was working the flood and was up in the hills and went to the Intermountain Alliance. And those guys, they had meetings. And so she went to their meeting one night. It was kind of like this. And there's a woman kind of standing in the back by herself. And our case manager kind of walked over to her, started a conversation, found out, well, I might have some problems at my house. Went by, stopped by her house, and she had some major damage and some debris. And there happened to be a team that she was scheduling in a week. They were working down the road. Said, well, I can have them come here. And she lived up, one of those mountain drives where there's maybe half a dozen homes. And so case manager said, well, what about your neighbors? And she said, I don't know my neighbors. And she says, well, would you go with me? And we'll go knock on the door and see if we need some help. And so they went to everybody. They found that of the 5 or 6 homes, maybe 4 or 5 of them, a little bit of debris where a couple of them had some major issues. But so this one went with her to all of those. Then as the team came, to help with the repairs and the debris removal, she had this woman go with her. And she said 2 months later, she goes to the Intermountain meeting. And this woman's not in the back anymore. She's right up here talking with her friends and neighbors. And suddenly it's the community. And so while sometimes this is kind of a bummer, bad things, occasionally there's little rays of light that come through. We'll make those kinds of things happen. So we'll end on a happy note. Unless anybody else has questions. All right. Thanks, everybody.